narrative roadmap, we talked about evaluation and technical support capacity, but we're not going to do that because we're going to take a little detour and talk about budgets. Who would have ever thought it would actually be fun to talk about budgets? We all know that dollars makes a big difference. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about budgets, budget narrative, what goes into budgets, and I'm going to show you a sample spreadsheet that's on your jump drive that you'll be able to use to create a budget. So the budget section, review criteria is number 6, support requested, with a total of 5 points, which again seems small, but it's not. These are all important sections. They're very important. Because of that, we recommend this could be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 8 pages with all the information that you need to put in to your application that has to do with the budget. And the point I was going to make. Oh, it's good too. Well, there's an attachment, SF424A, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Oh, the point I was going to make was the budget narrative is not part of the project narrative. It's not one of the 7 sections. This is a separate document, a separate attachment, it's a separate requirement. It does count. We'll go through that, but it's not part of the project narrative. It's a separate attachment. So, parts of the budget, there are 3 essential parts. One is Form SF424A, one is the budget narrative itself, and one are the budget spreadsheets, which you use to derive your numbers to actually plug into the budget narrative and the Form 424A. So let's just talk about those just real quickly, each one. Form 424A, this is what it looks like. This is a form that comes in your package. It's downloadable. You fill it out, you save it as a PDF, and then you attach it where you need to. It is not part of the page limit. So this form is required, but it's not part of the page limit. And essentially, you are just building your 4-year budget for the program. And this is on page, let's see, this is on page 10 and 11 of your FOA, and it gives you instructions on how this form is to be filled out. You fill it out for all 4 years right up here, year 1, 2, 3, 4. This is actually the catalog of federal domestic number for EMSC. You put it under the new or revised budget in column E, so it's $130,000 for each year, and if you plug that in, those numbers then auto-populate here your totals. So you're really submitting a project proposal for $520,000 because it's over 4 years. Then in section B is where you put in the details of your budget by category, which we'll get into there in just a second. You can't actually fill out this form until you've done your budget spreadsheets and got your numbers. This is actually, you fill this out after you've got your numbers for each of the categories. But these are the categories that are outlined in the FOA exactly as you see them in the FOA, and that you'll write your budget narrative to. Again, and column 1 is year 1, column 2, year 2, 3, and 4. These numbers may be identical, and may have a little difference based on your projected estimates of budget costs in years 2, 3, and 4. The second page of this is section C, you don't need to worry about, or D, and then section E is just, it asks for future funding periods, and it says here first, second, third, and fourth. This means the first future funding period, meaning the first funding period beyond year 1. So it's actually the second year. This is year 2, year 3, and year 4. It's just $130,000 we put over there. And then,
where do we find this sample?
this is it. It's part of the download, the package you get from grants.gov. The T showed you yesterday, and there's a form in there, and it's fillable. It's a fillable form. So it's there. It's not part of the page limit. All you need to do is basically you need to just get your budget numbers figured out, and then you just populate this. So it's pretty straightforward. Again, look at pages 10 and 11 of the FOA for instructions. Part 2, the budget narrative. This is a required piece of the budget, and it describes and justifies all project costs by the categories on that 424 form, and also that are in the FOA. It is required. It does count towards the 80-page limit. So this tends to be a Word document that you're putting in narrative format and going through each of the categories and talking about your costs in each, and then submitting as a should save it as a PDF and then submit it as a PDF. But these, again, are the categories in the budget: personnel, fringe, benefit costs, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, other, and indirect. They follow what's in the FOA and what's on the 424 form. So let's just go through each of these real quick. Personnel, this tends to be the largest budget category for your grants. It's basically all personnel paid on the project. You list the name of the individual, the title, grant responsibilities, percent of time, and dollars requested. This is also a good place to talk about in-kind support, or support that's being donated from people that aren't being paid by the grant, to show that there's support for the project within your state. Fringe benefits includes retirement, insurance, social security, leave time, things like this. In reality, every employer individual has an individualized fringe benefit rate based on how much leave they actually use during the year and that type of thing, so it kind of goes up and down. What we do is we always use as an institution average, which is about 35% where we're at. So you just need to find your institution's average for fringe benefit. Use that rate. That's probably the best thing to do. Is that what you've done, for instance, Rhonda?
Yeah, we have a specific fringe rate for non-research.
Okay, good. Specific rate. Okay. Good.
Well, it's different if you're exempt or non-exempt,
Okay. So it might differ just by those two classifications.
in my case.
Okay. Travel, probably the next biggest category after salary or personnel costs. You want to describe the purpose and travel of the travel and estimates of costs both locally and out of state. Things like transportation, registration, lodging, per diem, and so forth. And it goes into quite a bit of detail in this in the FOA of what types of travel are required for the program or for the grant. And you'll see these first four in red are essentially required, and so therefore your reviewer will be expected to see something about these. The first is the program managers meeting, which is essentially the every other year meeting for just EMSC program managers, which we had 2 years ago, and we'll have again next year. So really in years 1 and 3 of this current 4-year cycle, you'll be talking about the program managers meeting. And the cost will be a little bit different because it says budget, I think, for 1 to 2 people to attend that meeting. And then in the even years, EMSC program meeting, the all program meeting, like which we just had last May, where everybody comes, targeted issue, DCARN, state partnership grantees come together. That's the meeting that will happen in year 2 and 4. And your budget, you're supposed to budget for 3 to 4 people to come in. It's described in your FOA. So the cost will be a little bit different. So it's worth, again, breaking those out in your budget to show that you actually know there's a little bit differential cost for those years. Obviously, a NEARC workshop is required each year, so that amount probably can be the same from year to year. The advisory board, since that's one of your performance measures, and you're expected to have at least one in-person advisory board meeting, you probably have more than that. Certainly, it's reasonable to reimburse folks for attending that meeting, mileage and hotel and per diem and that sort of thing. Another type of travel that's possible that some folks go to is the NESEMSO, Pediatric Emergency Care Council annual meeting, so that would be another example of travel. We'll show you the spreadsheet here in just a minute of how that can all be calculated. Equipment. Tony.
I just got a question on the travel piece.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how specific they're going to be, because it talks about local travel and out-of-state travel, or local has no per diems and things like that, where out-of-state does. In Texas, in Alaska, and some other places. Going to Amarillo is the same as out-of-state travel from many other states. And so, as long as we show that in the justification, that's not going to be an issue if we do per diems on our local travel.
No, it shouldn't be. Is there any reason it shouldn't be?
I mean, it wasn't before, but it was pretty specific to spell that. Or how close they were.
I mean, per diem is certainly a reasonable expense that is incurred to travel, whether it's in or out of state.
They differentiated it pretty clearly in here. That's the only reason.
I didn't know that Texas.
you explain the distances, the
Yeah.
time and the travel, so that the reviewer and grants manager have a clear understanding?
But you could have some sizable
Yeah,
mileage reimbursements and that type of thing.
yeah.
If you explain that. I mean, in other states, they have to, you have to fly even though it's in state probably. Okay, so equipment, it's not, equipment is essentially property that costs $5,000 or more per unit and has a useful life of at least 1 year. So it's really, most of you probably won't have anything for equipment because it's not like a laptop or a projector, because those are all less than 5,000 usually. So you may very well not have anything for this category, but if you do, make sure that it's a legitimate project need. But like an example would be like a server, a data server, which costs $10,000, $12,000. Would be a piece of equipment that would go in this category. Supplies, this is where you would put something like a laptop, because these are things that are less than 5,000, include everything from pencils and pens and paper clips and that type of thing to, laptops, books, educational materials, things that you would need to use to send out survey invitations and that kind of thing. Contractual is essentially an agreement with a third party that performs specified grant activities, which, again, some of you might have, but probably the bulk of you don't have, such as meeting services, training, data collection, entry. I mean, how many have used contractual in the past, that category? Aaron, Jill. So some of you have. You just need to clearly describe the need and purpose and make sure that it's not just passing through grant dollars to some other entity. Joe.
I haven't looked all the way through your sample worksheet, but I was just curious. I'm just looking back at my past, my current project grant period, the current 4-year period. The way my predecessor put together the spreadsheet was that contract travel, for example, PEP instructors, was listed as a separate travel item from in-house travel, let's say. Is that something that she just dreamed up? Does it matter whether contract travel is lumped in with staff travel?
I don't. I think it could probably go either way. My preference might be to put it under travel since it is travel. And you know, as long as you describe it, if you can still have an amount of contractual for their time,
Right.
then you would describe that here, then you could say they're travel. Let's see the travel section for their travel expenses. I think you could do it either way, really.
Joe, what type of activity was it? It's for a consultant?
It was paying contractors for mileage and lodging and so forth to do training.
Yeah.
So it was a travel, specifically a travel expense. It was just not for a state employee. It was contracted services.
What do you think, T? Should they put it all under contractual?
I think you'd need to look probably at state, how the accounting system is set up, because if it's not a federal state employee, you might not be able to reimburse for those services. But if it's under a contract, that's probably why it's set up that way.
Well, we
There's
can't.
history behind it.
That's the reason that I was confused about it, because it's no problem for us to reimburse non-employees.
Oh,
But it was listed separately and it was confusing to me.
I think as long as it's spelled out and it's properly described here and with refer to the section on travel for their expenses there. Okay, that's fine. Carol, do you have a thought?
I was just going to say, I don't know what your department policies are, but we avoid contracts like the plague, because they're like 6 to 9 months to get one through. So I put it under travel for people that are teaching and stuff like that. Yeah, we try not to contract anything.
Okay. But in general, this is a lesser used budget category. Some of you might, but and then there's always other expenses, usually things like phone communications, conference calls, software licenses, other types of things that don't fit into any of the other categories. And then indirect costs. This is the percent that goes to your institution to be able to use, office space, have light, heat, and administrative support. All institutions do have an indirect cost rate. Some are pretty high, some aren't nearly as high. But obviously you need to know your institution's rate and plug that into the, we'll show you here in the spreadsheet. Just as a point, that money doesn't come directly off the top of the grant. It's applied to all of your direct costs, the percentages. But when you add it back into the direct costs, total up to your total amount of $130,000. We'll show you the formula here in the spreadsheet. So here's an example of a budget narrative, just a screenshot of what a budget narrative could look like. Under personnel, you have information about the project director, who that individual is and what their responsibilities are in terms of oversight, who they work with, and information on their salary. This is an example of kind of a more detailed budget narrative specifically for the personnel. And the program manager, Jonathan Smith, is the program manager, and works with Dr. Doe, collects information on performance measures and so forth. 100% devoted to the program, and how much federal funds will be required for his position. Then a total of those two together for year one salaries here, and then the note of a 3% cost of living has been applied to project salaries for years 2 and 3 of this proposal, and something about they go up in years 2 and 3. Fringe benefits, 27%. So here those rates are, and then the total for the 2, and then the same sort of thing about what happens in years 2 and 3. So that's an example of just a snapshot of how you might describe personnel expenses in the budget narrative. I'm going to show you an alternative here in just a second as well. So the budget spreadsheets. Now, we have always included these with the NEARC applications, even though they have not been explicitly required. But in this year's FOA, if you look on page, where is it? On page 14 of the FOA, it says here in pretty bold type, include a budget spreadsheet and narrative organized by the categories. So you will obviously at a minimum need a spreadsheet to derive your budget numbers. But the FOA is actually saying to include that in with your budget narrative. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do that, but this is again part of the 80-page limit. So this is an example of a budget spreadsheet. We'll open it up in just a second here, but it's just in an Excel document where you could describe the personnel on the project, their names, their positions, their FTE on the project, annual salaries, project salary, fringe benefit rate, benefit amount, and total. And these are all formulas in Excel, so once you plug in their annual salary and their FTE, these other numbers will go automatically. Travel, examples of the type of travel, the annual grantee meeting, the expense item, airfare, hotel per diem, registration, mileage, parking, transportation, amounts for each, projected amounts, how many people, and then a total. And then supplies, project supplies, and so forth for each item or each type of category of item and total amounts.
Can you send that budget spreadsheet?
Well, we're going to open it up here just a second. You all have it on your junk.
Oh, I have it.
Yep. So don't worry. That's just a screenshot of it. So anyway, getting back to this idea of having a budget spreadsheet and a narrative, you can really do this a couple of different ways. You can attach these as separate documents. You can attach, write your narrative in a Word document, turn it into a PDF, and then attach it. Because under your budget narrative, there's room for more than one attachment. So you can attach the narrative, and then you can also develop your spreadsheets, and then turn those into PDFs, and then attach those as well. Or, and this is what I might suggest, especially if you're having any trouble with page limit and feel like you're going to go over 80 pages, you can develop your budget narrative in a Word document, and then using the spreadsheets that you're using to derive your numbers, you can actually cut and paste the relevant tables from those spreadsheets directly into your Word document under the budget narrative where they go. That way it's actually probably a little bit more seamless for the reviewer to read about the personnel costs and who's on the project, and then to see a little table of those costs right in the same document. So couple of different ways you can think about it. And here's just a screenshot of an example. You could have a really fairly concise description of the personnel in text format, talking about the project director and the program manager. You can also say that, remember, you have attachment 1, which is a job description for key personnel. So that's already part of what's required, and it does count for a grading page limit. So you can say, see attachment 1 for further experience and duties of these individuals. You know, you can talk about the fringe benefits rate here briefly, and then you could have a little table that just basically summarizes and shows all the detail for those individuals. So you cover personnel in, you know, maybe half a page here. So there are ways to do this that are more concise if you're concerned about page length. Other budget considerations, just in general, being careful about food and meals for meetings, because those, if you list those out separate, I think it's okay to list per diem, talking about per diem, but you talk about catering and banquet costs. Those tend to send red flags up at HRSA, so don't list those out as such. Include them in per diem or room rental. They'll pay from separate funds. Equipment, such as the purchase of equipment for in support of performance measures for ambulances, is allowed. It's an allowable expense. You have to explain it in your detail, and it will be subject to approval. If you read the FOA closely this year, it talks about the use of money for marketing and promotion is not allowed. So, and that means like you can't pay a marketing or an advertising firm to actually promote the EMSC program in your state. But it also means things like, what other examples, Steve, would there be of like promotional items not being allowed?
Giveaway items, like you described there, the T-shirts, the logo, some things that have been used many years.
Yeah.
That have been,
Those are being,
the mugs.
yeah, those
Yeah.
are just not being allowed anymore, right?
Stuff we give out at conferences, pen lights, shears, what have you, giveaways.
Educational materials, yes.
Educational, but
No.
promotional.
You give
We set up a booth.
Gil forceps would be equivalent.
Right.
Brazos
Think
tapes.
creatively.
Yes,
Exactly.
I mean, we're
Outside
giving
the
out,
box.
we have to give out flash drives.
Right,
Those contain information.
right. It's educational material.
Joe?
I just wondered about, in the past, I have used incentives to help to try to drive up participation in needs assessments. Is that specifically not permitted, or is that a gray area, or?
I asked Nikki Reynolds this question specifically, and she said it sounds like it's pretty charcoal gray. She basically said it's possible that it can be allowed, but it'd be better not to even go there.
Okay.
So I suppose, you know, if you have,
It's just the scrutiny. That,
Yeah.
You know, I can give you an example. There was a state that had an EMSC logo on I think it was like a backpack, and it was left at a bus station in this particular state. The state gave us a call because the media got a hold of it, got all the way up to her, said it totally. Now this is not related to why they're cutting promotional items, but you know, just everyone is like, we do allow that. It's okay in the program. But then the question is that the most appropriate use of limited funding comes back, and so the argument goes back and forth. So it doesn't feel safe, but if it's, you know, if it really truly is an educational item with the EMSC logo, that it's going to, in essence, promote the program but also educate the public.
yeah.
Think about it that way.
So I just, you know, because I know Mickey said like outright, you cannot like insert a dollar bill into a survey invitation. The token of appreciation, blah, blah, blah. You can't use the EMSC fund. You can, if it comes from somewhere else, you can. But there's maybe some other things that could be, you know, classified as more educational materials that could also serve like consider.
Jelly bellies, for example.
There's got to be a way to spin it. I don't know.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, for my EMS advisory members, because they're doing in-kind. In the past, they've been given for promotional items, which is a laptop bag or fleece or something of that nature. So that's no longer acceptable in the schools. Unless I write except educational.
Somehow turn it into an additional item.
Could it be a supply?
Is there advocating?
Can you get into C collar?
A very comfy sea color.
And my other question was back to personnel. Is the cap in place, in some instances, there's salary cap or beyond?
Yes,
Is that at 179,000?
yes. The salary cap the NIH imposes on its grants is being used for the EMSC grant, so you cannot pay anything more than 179.7, I think it is. It's explicit in there in the FOA. So if you have a PI that's making more than that, you basically can only use that amount as the base, and then it's the percentage of time that they are on the project, off of that amount. So if they're making 300,000 and working half-time, you can't say that they get 150,000 and it's under the cap. You have to use 179,000 as the base and then half of that. So,
That's good.
yeah, but there's an example in your FOA, so make sure you know that.
How many people typically are on an EMSC state partnership grant, personnel-wise? Is there an average?
T, what would you say?
Well-
How many people are budgeted on the EMSC grant in a typical state?
Personnel and salaries, about 33% of the MSC budget is dedicated to personnel and fringe benefits.
But how
Was
many,
that the question?
how many actual people?
People per state.
Only 3%.
Oh, on
4, 5,
average.
6.
You have a program manager,
And only a third of their salary is being charged to the EMSC grant?
No, I was thinking the overall total budget of what's dedicated to personnel and fringe benefits is about 33%. When you're asking about how many individuals are charging personnel to the grant, most is just one. And you don't see several folks in one grant. Most of them put it into their operations. Or it's matched is 50% to the grant, 50% state.
but you might have a project director and then a program manager, maybe 2 people, or just maybe it's the program managers or both roles. Probably not more than 2 or maybe 3 if you have a fan person on there who's getting some money.
Based on the last budget, I'd safely say one.
So, yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Last thing, again, to reiterate what was said yesterday about that no more than 10% of the budget can be dedicated to or used for non-performance measure activities. And that's, a lot of your non-performance measure, well, personnel is, again, probably the biggest chunk of your budget. And so if you're doing some non-performance measure activities, you have to somehow, if the program manager's full salary is being charged against the project, you have to be able to describe in the personnel section of that, somehow no more than 10% of that individual's time is being used for these non-performance measure activities. Because it's likely not going to be just its own cost over here for these other activities. It's just part of that individual's time and part of their fringe benefits. So, think about being able to describe that in your budget, because if a whole bunch of their time is being used for other activities, then probably over the 10%. And finally, don't let this happen to you. These are actual comments from reviewers. The budget section does not contain sufficient detail to explain project expenses. And the amounts listed for some expenses are questionable. You do not want to hear reviewers saying that about your budget narrative. Okay. Questions in general about the budget? We're going to open up the spreadsheet here just a minute. I want to walk you through how it works so you can use it. Are there any questions that I can answer about the budget? Okay.